And now to our first live panel discussion on a just transition, pathways to a low-carbon energy future. A quick housekeeping note, if you're a New Economy Forum delegate watching live on our platform, please submit questions to our moderators by clicking the Ask a Question tab below the video player on your screen. If you're watching our live stream, please send along your questions using the hashtag #OurNewEconomy. Our speakers are Darius Adamczyk, Chairman and CEO of Honeywell, Christiana Figueres, founding partner of Global Optimism, and Jean-Pascal Tricoire, Chairman and CEO of Schneider Electric. Our moderator is Zhu Ming, former Deputy Managing Director of the IMF.
Warmly welcome everyone come to these sessions. As introduced, we are very fortunate to have excellent panelists on this session. And let's start with Christiana. Christiana, you run the whole thing. I mean, Paris negotiation 5 years ago. Now 5 years pass. You sit comfortably in Costa Rica. So what is your assessments today's situation with 5 years ago? I mean, where we're making progress, where you think we're lag behind, and what should we do? What's the key things you really think we have to do in the next few years? Christiana.
Well, actually, I think I can report quite happily that we have progressed quite a bit in the past 5 years. The direction of travel is now very clear. The global economy is in the process of decarbonizing, not at the pace and speed and scale that we need, but the direction is incontrovertible. I would say the corporate sector has understood that this is in their interest, that to protect their bottom line, to protect investments, to protect themselves against stranded assets, that they need actually to decarbonize their own operations and certainly their supply chain, and in fact, even up and down the entire value chain in order to get onto a more sustainable path. The financial sector has also come on board, and they are understanding as well that they need to steer away from both transition risk as well as physical risks and stranded asset risk, and that shifting capital over to clean technologies, clean sectors, clean corporations is the best way to protect the value of those assets. Now, finally, geopolitically, we're beginning to align. We have had quite a year this year with starting with the EU, which in the aftermath of the worst of the crisis of COVID came out to say that their recovery packages from COVID would be both green and inclusive, and setting the tone for other recovery packages, because we're already at $12 trillion in recovery packages around the world, and actually we need them all to be both green and inclusive. That announcement from the EU was followed by an announcement from President Xi Jinping in China, saying that China is committing to be at peak emissions before 2030 and at net zero carbon emissions before 2060, to be followed by very similar, but actually even quicker targets, sooner targets from Korea, Japan, and South Africa. And then, of course, the latest news from the United States with a new president in the White House as of January, vowing to get back on track with decarbonizing the US economy. So everything pointing in the same direction. My actual concern is no longer about the direction. My concern now is speed and scale, and we are far from the speed and scale that we need.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you. Send us a very positive note. I think it's very nice to hear that one and your overall assessment. So we'll come back a few things. You cover so many issues. But in your comments, you also mentioned business community has done a lot in all the front, right? Decarbonize. We are very fortunate to have two leading company CEOs here with us. So let's ask them, and how can business help land the transmission? Let's start with Jean-Pascal. Jean, please.
Yeah, well, the first thing we can do is to show the example and to do it with our ecosystem of suppliers, integrators, people who work with us. Take our example. We've decided to be, we've committed to be carbon neutral by 2025. And actually, carbon neutral, including scope 3 by 2040, and to be net zero by 2030, and to embark in all that journey, our numerous suppliers and people in our ecosystem. The second point is really to focus on technology innovation and solutions to enable that decarbonization. And the first thing that we should really realize that solutions do exist today. It's not like we need the next big innovation to engineer a path to the 1.5-degree trajectory. We have already all the ingredients to really reconcile progress, that means giving access to energy to everybody on Earth, on sustainability, which is bringing back the trajectory of temperature within the 1.5 degrees. And for that, there is a huge disruption taking place at the moment, which is digitization. It seems kind of obvious, but the first episode of digitization was about people to people, and it changed the way we work and live. The second one is about how we live with our environment, in our home, in our buildings, in our cities, in our factories. Digitization gives access to a very high level of efficiency, a step change in efficiency. The second point is electrification, because electricity is the only way to decarbonize consumption and production of energy. And based on low carbon electricity, renewable, of course, coupled with storage, hydro, and nuclear, where it is politically acceptable. If you couple savings due to digitization that you can couple with a high level of circular economy, which digitization really allows to a next level, and couple it with electrification, which should double in the next coming 20 years. That means as much investment in electricity in the next 20 years as has been since the beginning of electricity. And then you decarbonize that electrification by going to renewable on low carbon electricity, then you've got the equation that reconciles progress on sustainability. And it's more a question of making the decision now, because every decision we make does count. Every building we build today will be built for the next 40 years. Every factory, every next 50 years. Every factory built today will be here in the next coming decades. So every decision we make today counts for the future.
Thank you, Jean-Pascal. And 2025 carbon neutrality, which is an amazing target. I think that's wonderful. And also digitalization, electricitization, those very powerful drives to push for the goal. Thank you. So let's turn to Darius and Honeywell.
Well, I think this topic is one that comes natural to Honeywell, because really, when you think about energy savings, doing things that are friendly for the planet, that's really our fiber. And when you look at the makeup of our entire portfolio, more than 50% of it is ESG oriented. And I think this transition has to happen in two phases. I think the first phase is relatively easy, and the second phase is a little bit harder. And I think it's companies like Honeywell and many others, and Schneider's responsibilities to really help a lot of the industries make that transition. I characterize the first phase being energy conservations and energy savings. So it's, for example, some of the segments that we play with, whether it's aircraft travel, whether it's energy used in buildings, whether it's the energy consumed in industrial plants. There are many technologies available today which can dramatically save the energy uses in these various industries. And companies like Honeywell and Schneider and others are ready, and those technologies are there and available. I think that's a very short-term oriented goal to help reduce carbon emissions. That we can do that tomorrow. Their technologies are there and available. Secondly is, I would say, carbon replacement. I'll give you an example. Honeywell has a very strong presence in the refining and petrochemical industry throughout the globe. Provide many of the, we're not in that business ourselves, but we provide many of these solutions. And it's our responsibility to help a lot of these companies make that transition to the energy of the future. And I'll just give you a couple of very specific examples. One being Ecofine. We've had some of these technologies using some of the other feedstock products, such as jatropha, fats and oils, to really feed as refining. We have these technologies. We're optimizing them now. We're happy that there's more interest in these kinds of technologies than I've seen in a long time. So that's great. We're working on things like hydrogen cell UAVs and UAMs. That's a market that's not even here. And we're already working on how do we power some of these UAVs and UAMs with different energy sources. Electro-powered aircraft, another area of focus for us, which is the technologies aren't available here yet today, but they'll be here 2, 3, 4 years from now. So we have to address both the short term and the long term. The short-term technologies are here, and frankly, more of those should be used. But we also have to address the longer term is how do we displace the use of carbon for other forms of energy?
Thank you, Darius. You really emphasize the technology. You mentioned technology is there, right? Particularly short-term is available. And how can we preserve the cross-border innovation network? How do you see the technology transfer? I think that is also the most important thing if we want to bring the whole world in a decarbonized society. Yeah.
Well, I think, as you know, we're very global companies. We have huge presence in the U.S. and China and India and the Middle East and Europe, just about every place on Earth. And we innovate all over the globe. And, innovation happens everywhere. I think that innovation should be shared, should be distributed throughout the globe in an economic fashion. And, we have a lot of innovation taking place in every one of our innovation centers, wherever they happen to be in the world. And some of them are better and specialized in some things versus others. But, we leverage all of our innovation centers to drive greenhouse gas emissions, energy conservation, and so on. And I think what's particularly important for us is different economies, different regions have a little bit of a different path to a green agenda. And by having a local engineering and innovation footprint, you can optimize to how that green agenda is going to take place and what that roadmap will look like. And we're excited to be a part of those solutions all over the world and part of the solutions in the many countries in which we are part of the fiber of the society.
Jean-Pascal, you mentioned investments. You say investments in the electricity in the next 20 years is really the key. Do you see the capital market moving to that direction? Do you feel any constraint in capital market in financing and to support green futures?
I think Christiana mentioned it, but the most striking, probably pivoting that happened in the issue of climate change in the past years has been that pivot of the financial market. And to give a very practical answer to your question, I guess Tesla wouldn't have its market cap of today if the market was not realizing this huge disruption to electrification, which is happening today in the world. On one would say, okay, but electricity is a technology of past century, but it's not the same electricity. It's an electricity that's going to be based on renewable. It's going to be much more decentralized. It's going to be fully digitized to be synchronized with the usage of electricity. It's going to be produced locally through microgrids. We do, for instance, in the US, we have a joint venture with Carlyle to deal with large projects to supply locally electricity to large infrastructure to make it more resilient and greener. And we start by JFK Airport in New York, so a really significant infrastructure. So that electricity will be different. Of course, the visible part of the iceberg is electric vehicle. Everybody is speaking about it, but think about it. All new technologies are powered by this digital and electrical capability. It's about IT, which is one of the fastest growing consumption of electricity. And probably the biggest conversion that will happen is not vehicle, it's not IT, it's going to be buildings. Because in many geographies, buildings are the biggest carbon emitters and the biggest polluters. And that comes because they're based on pure fossil fuel. And in the future, buildings like cities will be all digital and all electrical combined. And this is where we have focused. We are 100% focused at Schneider because it needs a systemic approach. You cannot go piece by piece. You need to think the whole problem together. You need to save because of digital. You need to electrify because you want it low carbon. And you need to make sure your electricity is decarbonized. So when we speak about systemic efficiency, we have to make sure at Schneider that we provide an integrated combo of microgrids, smart grids, which will manage the complexity of those networks of the future, and then smart buildings, smart manufacturing, smart homes, and smart cities that can plug into that system. So it's really exciting from an engineering point of view, the internet on the use of technologies which have been developed elsewhere, that combination of Internet of Things powered by 5G, big data, and AI is really making it much simpler than before. And this is a very exciting horizon on sector to develop in the next years to come.
You made a very important point. You need a systemic approach. I think that's a very important point. Use the technologies, 5G, AR, and make things much, much easier to have an overarching, picture. But systemic approach, not only from company level, but also from the country levels. So then the key issues, what role of government? I think that's become ever important. Christiana, so what do you see the role of a government today after 5 years?
Well, obviously, corporations can take all of the important steps that we have just heard from Darius and from Jean-Pascal and from many other quite enlightened CEOs that are anticipating both deeper carbon constraint, but also much higher performance, environmental and social performance from their clients and customers. So in anticipation of both of that, they're already moving into the future, or rather, they're pulling the future into the present, which is what these CEOs are doing. Now, obviously, in those countries in which governments can also have visibility into the future, and in those countries in which governments are already putting in place policies and measures that both incentivize clean technologies, efficient, smart, non-polluting technologies, and at the same time have punitive measures for the technologies that are arcane, inefficient, polluting, and polluted. That makes the life of the enlightened CEOs much easier when you have predictability of policy, and when policy is actually pointed in the right direction. That means that these CEOs can march forward at a much speedier pace. One of the things that governments can do, of course, is finally come to a resolution on a price of carbon. We had a price of carbon years ago, and then for many reasons that we don't need to discuss here today, the carbon market is actually practically non-active anymore, except for in a few jurisdictions. But an active carbon market with a carbon price that would continue to step up in level every year or every 2 years, even every 5 years, would actually allow these companies to be able to move much quicker. We don't have that yet. And that is one of the homework tasks that is in front of governments for COP26 when they come together at the intergovernmental negotiating process in Glasgow next year.
Thank you. Government should have a vision and also make this clear to the whole society. I think that's a very important point. And also, what do you see the role of a government from Honeywell? The rest?
Yeah, I think for us, the government has a tough task because they have to balance a few different things. But it is possible. I'll give a very specific example of where I think the government's done a great job, which is they have to make decisions which are economically viable for their citizens. So, I mean, we obviously want to go to a carbonless future tomorrow if that was possible, and if it was economically viable. In some instances, it's maybe not viable. So there has to be a transition path that's built that encourages technology and innovation, doesn't play favorites, but encourages those technologies to flourish, encourages the support system to flourish, and eventually hopefully at a rapid rate, but we can debate as to what rapid is, that transition is made. And frankly, some of these technologies, things like eco-fining, using alternative sources to do refining, they do require that government stimulus, catalyst per se, to get things moving and create the infrastructure which will make those kinds of technologies long-term viable. I mean, one example, which I think has worked very, very well, is the European Mobile Air Conditioning Directive. Basically, 99% of greenhouse gas emissions were eliminated because Europe disallowed the use of HFCs in vehicles. And it's been a great transition. Now they're used primarily HFOs, and it's been great for the planet. It's insignificant from a cost of a vehicle. It was accomplished in an economic way. And now the whole industry is in a dramatically different place than where it was before. And I think that's one example of effective use of legislation and working with partnerships with companies to make that transition.
Thank you. The balanced approach and also encourage technology transformation is a very important role of a government to play. I think those are very important points. Also, Jean-Pascal, the same question. What's the role of a government you see from your particular view?
I would insist first on the necessity that companies like ours who work on technology, on innovation, work very closely with governments, because a lot of the technologies that we are talking at the moment, which are already existing, can be deployed and can be the solution to a 1.5-degree trajectory. They were not existing 5 years ago. And the problem is not anymore technology. It's about adoption and decision. So to build on what Christiana was saying, not only in some places build a carbon price, that should be the case everywhere, because every decision we make has a carbon impact, therefore an hidden cost impact, but already taking out fossil fuel subsidies that are still existing in a number of places. The second point is really to be much more conscious of those major technology disruptions on making decisions now, right? When some countries, for instance, in Europe, are moving to all electrical building, like the Netherlands, like the UK, like the Nordics, well, that delineates, because again, each building built today will be here for the many decades to come. That changes completely the trajectory of carbon emission for a city in those parts of the world. Therefore, we have to work very, very in a very close manner with governments so that they understand what we can bring. They choose the decisions they have to make to really change the path of their societies, but that they don't wait too long, because every waiting somewhere is making us go adrift from a course of correction on carbon emissions. There is one more thing I would like to insist on, is that there is sometimes a misconception that these changes are going against the economics. It's all the contrary. Most of carbon reduction is based on energy consumption reduction, energy efficiency and resource efficiency. On all companies, Schneider first, we are all obsessed by productivity, by reducing the consumption of any resource. So actually the payback of efficiency is the best payback you can ever get in a company or in a society. And the other misconception is that this is going against jobs. And that's not true either. I mean, multiple studies have been done together with us or without us to show that launching a wave of retrofit on existing buildings to make them smart and green, existing manufacturing to make them smart, green, and future-proof because more automated, and on cities to make them easier to share, more livable, better to live in. Actually, this is creating a lot of local jobs because you are not speaking about new build, you are not speaking about new projects, you are speaking about thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs of people who are going on site and applying digital electrical technology to the retrofit and revamping of what we've built over the past centuries. So all of this actually is quite virtuous. It just asks probably for the most difficult thing that we have as human beings is to rethink in a different manner the future of our cities and the future of our companies.
Thank you. We have to have a human touch on the whole thing. I think that's the most important thing. Government should set policy and stand to push. Now, and Christiana, in your opening remark, you make a very important point. You say direction is there, right? You're really concerned currently is speed and scope. You also mentioned we're currently in crisis. I think that really the key issues, their stimulus package, their sort of recovering plans. How can we transforming the recovery into the green future? What is your thought and recommendation?
Yes, thank you. That's exactly the key here, because I think we all realize that the economy is being injected with unprecedented levels of capital at 12 trillion and counting, all of which will be deployed between now. Some already has been deployed, but between now and the end of next year. So certainly over the next 18 months, all of this capital will be deployed. Couple of issues about that capital, in addition to being unprecedented scale. First, it is capital that governments are borrowing, and that debt is not going to be paid by any of us on this panel. It will be paid by our children and grandchildren. So first, just from a moral perspective, let's make sure that that capital is being invested for the well-being of future generations and not to their detriment. But secondly, let's remember that this level, unprecedented level of capital, will very likely not be able to be injected into the global economy over the next 5 to 10 years, again, a second time. And that is why we have to ensure that this capital does double or triple duty as it is injected into the economy. It absolutely must restart the economy and create millions of jobs that have been lost, plus many more, as we have heard from Jean-Pascal. Investing into a green economy creates millions of jobs. Just the US plan will create 10 million jobs in the next few years in the United States. But also that same capital, not additional capital, that same capital injected into clean technologies, clean corporations, clean sectors will not just create jobs and restart the economy, it will accelerate addressing climate change. So you have the double duty or the double impact of the same capital. And the triple impact that I think is also going to be necessary is to address inequality. If we're able to understand that we have not asked for many of these crises to converge upon us in 2020, but we have seen them converge. The climate crisis, the COVID, and the economic crisis that came after that, the inequality crisis. To that, I could even add the biodiversity crisis. All of these crises, we thought they were separate, in separate silos and parallel to each other. Today, we understand that they have converged upon us and that they are actually inextricably interlinked. Hence, if those crises have converged upon us, we have to make the solution converge. And the solution, the key to that is this unprecedented amount of capital that is going into the global economy that would be able to address all of these crises in an integrated fashion, not sequentially, because we will not be able to do that. We will run out of capital very soon if we try to sequentially address each of these issues. But luckily, we understand that they're all interlinked and that we can address them in a coherent and a converging way.
Thank you. Very important point. In the current crisis situations, when we think about recovery, we think about or green futures, we have to bring these two things together is absolutely important. Now, this conference is actually holding in China, so I think we have to talk about China. And China committed a net neutrality in 2060, and both Honeywell and Schneider has a big operation in China. So, how do you see that? What can you do? What do you hope Chinese authority will do in the next few years to start to launch the whole thing? Let's once again start with Jean-Pascal.
Look, China is the largest population on Earth and on the fastest developing economy on such a scale. So the news on the commitment of carbon neutrality by 2060 is material, of course, to China, but also to the world. And especially because China can be seen also in many cases as a blueprint for development in many emerging countries. So that's setting a course for China, but that's also setting a course or inspiring other countries. Darius said it before. I think each country has a different set of attributes, different set of policies. In the case of China, in the sector we address, it has a very robust grid with one pretty centralized way of operating, which is completely unlike America, for instance, which is deregulated. And all of this is giving the floor to very different technologies, different innovations. But what I see from our operations in China, as well as I would see in other places of the world, is a lot of innovation coming on adapting to the very specific conditions of each country. And I would expect from this emergence of many ideas to really see a lot of new solutions coming up that can be picked and chosen all over the world, not only in China, not only in America, but everywhere in the world. Speak about India. It's, again, a completely different ecosystem where still hundreds of million people don't have access to electricity, and they start today with a new clean sheet of paper, so you can really innovate from scratch.
Thank you. The rest, Honeywell also have quite a big operation in China. So what can you see? What do you see the Chinese promise and how Honeywell can help?
Well, this is actually one of our bigger opportunities, and we are thrilled to be a big player in China, have been for decades. And although we're an international company, we're very much also a local company in China, and the kind of role that we can play across so many of the different industries that we participate in. For example, in the aerospace industry with our partnership in COMAC and bring more efficient and green air travel. In the oil and gas industry and helping to serve the refining and petrochemical segment in a very different way and helping them transition to much more green energy, different kind of refining, different kind of products, saving energy while protecting their industrial workers. These are all businesses that Honeywell is in. We currently have an installed base of nearly 30% of the world's commercial buildings. We can provide those solutions to help those buildings be much more efficient, much healthier, clean air, healthy buildings is another one of our solutions that we participate in. Warehouse automation, another business that we're in, making that much more efficient, effective, being able to operate in a safe manner. So just about every one of the key segments in China, Honeywell has a role. And I think what's really exciting is, we don't just participate on an export out basis. I mean, we are fully localized when it comes to sales, marketing, innovation, manufacturing. We like I said, we may be a global company, but we're very much local in China. And what's particularly exciting for us, and I alluded to this earlier, is not every country is going to have the same path for their green agenda. And by being local and being part of the solution in partnership with the Chinese government, I think we can develop and help design that green path.
Great, great. Thank you. Now, we also have a poll. Let's take 30 minutes to show and how people respond to our poll. Okay, so the question is, what will speed up a business transition toward a low carbon world? So capital markets only account 18%, 45% account consumer pressures, and the government regulation 27. You don't need any external pressures, and the company can run well. And oh, that's very interesting. So consumer pressure is the key issue now on from the audience. Now let's go back to the panel. We have still a few minutes. Let's open the floor. I saw some question flow in. One question from an anonymous says, what new energy technology are you most optimistic about in the next 5 years? So what is the new energy technology? Darius, you talked a lot on the technology. 30 seconds.
Sure. Well, I guess I have to pick one. There are so many, so it's probably unfair to pick just one, but I'm going to take our fuel cell technology. It's early days for us, but it's something we're very excited about. And one of the still key enablement tools to really drive renewable energy is efficient energy storage. And Honeywell wants to be very much part of that solution. I'm thrilled in terms of the leaps and bounds that we're making in development of fuel cell batteries. We're going to have prototypes available next year, and I think that can make a very, very big difference in helping the world transition to the use of renewables.
Also, the question about the carbon taxation. And is this important? What role should carbon tax play in transitions? Jean-Pascal?
Well, I think carbon taxation can help, but I believe that the return, you were speaking about the best technology or the most important technology. I would say the greenest, the cheapest, the fastest source of energy is the energy you save. And today, we are the generation which can experiment digitization or can deploy digitization to save at least 30% of energy everywhere we live and work. And that's a return of less than 3 years in most of the cases. And it makes things more livable, more comfortable, easier to use. And for companies, it makes us more profitable and more resilient, because once you are connected, you can detect potential outages. So I've got no hesitation that the first priority when you take any study, it's always the same thing, it's efficiency. And everywhere we live today and work is not efficient, so that's the absolute priority on this job creative. So I could go on and on. Priority is efficiency.
Thank you. That's an important point. Christina, after 5 years, after this particular session, you become more optimistic, or you become less, or you even pessimistic about the future?
I am more optimistic every day, especially when you listen to leaders like Darius and Jean-Pascal. And I think their commitment to pulling the future into the present is contagious. They are not just leading their own company, but they are leading the business sectors, in plural, into this very new world. And so I am every day more optimistic.
Excellent. I think that's the really nice note to end this fascinating sessions. It's become ever clear. This is our common role. I don't think I need to do any summary, but the key issue is let's work together to move to our own common green futures, and let's keep a very optimistic view and approach toward that goal, as Christina mentions. Thank you very much for our panelists, and it's just really a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much.